What if I told you the greatest cities on Earth didn't fall to war or natural disaster, but to their own success? Why did an empire of 1 million people vanish into the jungle? How did a desert capital with running water and gardens collapse when trade routes shifted? What doomed an island paradise built entirely by hand, on a foundation of tyranny? These aren't myths. They're real civilizations, and their ruins hold terrifyingly familiar lessons. In this video, we're uncovering 5 vanished cities: Angkor, Petra, Babylon, Tikal, and Nan Madol, and the shocking reasons they were abandoned. You'll discover the engineering marvel that doomed a superpower. Hint, it's still happening today. The single mistake that turned a wealthy trade hub into a ghost town. The forgotten warning buried in rubble for 2,000 years. By the end, you'll see these ancient collapses in a whole new light. And maybe even spot the parallels to our world. Stay until the finale. Nan Madol's story might just haunt you. Number 1. Angkor, in modern Cambodia, was the city the jungle took back. Angkor was the capital of the Khmer Empire and, at its height in the 12th century, the largest urban center in the pre-industrial world. Stretching across more than 1,000 square kilometers, it supported a population exceeding 1 million, more than London or Paris during the same era. It wasn't a single city in the modern sense, but an extensive network of temple complexes, agricultural fields, water systems, and residential clusters interwoven into a coherent civilization system. What made Angkor possible was its astonishing mastery of water. The Khmer engineers constructed an immense and interconnected hydraulic system, including barrages, massive rectangular reservoirs, canals, moats, and sluices. These innovations not only managed the seasonal monsoon floods but also allowed year-round rice cultivation, producing multiple harvests annually and sustaining a dense population. In fact, some barrages were so large that they functioned like inland seas. The West Barrier alone is 8 kilometers long and could hold over 50 million cubic meters of water. Recent studies suggest that this system was so efficient that Angkor could feed not just its own population but also surrounding settlements that may have supplied the capital with goods and manpower. But Angkor was not merely an engineering marvel. It was a sacred landscape. Urban design was inextricably tied to Hindu and later Buddhist cosmology. Temples were positioned as symbolic representations of Mount Meru, the cosmic mountain, and surrounded by moats representing the cosmic ocean. Roads and city grids were laid out with cardinal precision. Angkor Wat itself is an architectural embodiment of time and divinity, with its towers aligning with solstices, and its bas-reliefs offering a chronicle of Hindu epics and Khmer history. The orientation of Angkor Wat, unusually westward, has prompted scholarly debate, with some arguing it symbolizes the setting sun and death, others linking it to Vishnu's role as a solar deity. The city was also politically sophisticated. It was the seat of a succession of god-kings, Devarajas, who legitimized their rule through both military conquest and religious sanctity. Inscriptions and temple reliefs celebrate their victories, public works, and pious deeds. Jayavarman VII, for example, not only expanded the empire but also built hospitals, rest houses, and hundreds of temples, including the iconic Ben, with its enigmatic smiling faces carved into stone towers. Archaeological surveys have uncovered that these hospitals were not symbolic gestures but functional institutions, complete with water basins, dispensaries, and even rudimentary forms of triage. Yet by the 15th century, Angkor was abandoned as the political capital. What happened? There was no single cause. Instead, a convergence of environmental, political, and structural vulnerabilities likely led to its decline. Climate data derived from tree rings and sediment cores reveals that Angkor experienced decades of severe drought in the 14th century, followed by years of intense flooding. This variability would have strained the delicate hydraulic systems designed for more predictable patterns. Canals silted, reservoirs cracked, and agricultural output may have plummeted. A study published in Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, 2012, identified abrupt hydrological shifts as a key destabilizing force. But climate alone doesn't explain the abandonment. The Khmer Empire faced growing external pressure from the Thai Ayutthaya kingdom, which launched multiple invasions. The sacking of Angkor in 1431 is often cited as a critical blow. Internally, the state may have suffered from decentralization, overextended resources, and declining legitimacy of its rulers. The collapse of Angkor was a long unwinding. As administrative and economic functions migrated southward to the Phnom Penh region, Angkor's temples were gradually reclaimed by forest. Local populations likely remained in the region, continuing small-scale farming and pilgrimage. Indeed, some shrines within Angkor Wat were never fully abandoned, continuing as active religious sites for centuries. One of the most fascinating recent discoveries has radically reshaped our understanding of Angkor's urban form. LiDAR, light detection and ranging, surveys conducted in the 2010s peeled back the jungle canopy and revealed a sprawling network of roads, rice fields, suburban temples, and habitation mounds. This hidden infrastructure proves that Angkor was not a compact city but a low-density, agro-urban complex, a form of settlement without clear boundaries, challenging the traditional Western model of urbanism. The surveys also revealed entire temple complexes previously unknown to archaeologists, some of which suggest there was a systematic expansion of suburban religious life. Among the more unusual details uncovered are vast cocoon-shaped mounds that may have supported raised buildings or communal storage platforms. Their consistent shapes and locations suggest a level of urban planning and communal organization not typically associated with Southeast Asian cities of the period. Equally intriguing is the discovery of ceramic kilns and iron smelting sites within temple precincts, suggesting an intermingling of sacred and industrial functions in daily life. Another curious feature of Angkor's design is the intentional manipulation of groundwater through temple moats and reservoirs. Recent geoarchaeological studies propose that temples may have served as both spiritual and hydrological nodes, acting as catchment structures that supported groundwater recharge during dry seasons. Angkor was a civilization-scale experiment in sacred governance, sustainable engineering, and cosmological urban planning. Its failure was not just military or environmental, it was also a breakdown of balance between humanity, infrastructure, and nature. And therein lies its modern relevance. Angkor's fall reminds us that even the most sophisticated human systems are vulnerable when over-reliant on environmental stability. In an age of climate disruption, its ruins are more than remnants, they are warnings. Petra, in modern-day Jordan, the hidden city of the Nabateans. Petra is often introduced as a city of mystery, a lost world rediscovered by a Swiss explorer in 1812. But that's only part of the story. Petra's true significance lies not only in its iconic architecture but in the unique civilization that built it, the Nabateans. A nomadic Arab people who became masters of trade, stone carving, and hydraulic engineering. Founded in the early 1st millennium BCE, Petra rose to prominence between the 4th century BCE and the 1st century CE as a key node in the vast incense trade network that connected the Arabian Peninsula to the Mediterranean. This trade included not only frankincense and myrrh but also bitumen, balsam, silk, spices, and precious metals. The Nabateans capitalized on their control of desert routes, providing security, water, and storage for caravans traveling between Yemen and Gaza. What made Petra uniquely viable in its otherwise inhospitable desert location was the Nabateans' astonishing control over water. They developed a complex infrastructure of rock-cut channels, terracotta pipes, underground cisterns, and dam systems to capture flash floods and store water year-round. Some cisterns could hold hundreds of thousands of liters. And their hydraulic systems were so refined that they allowed for gardens, fountains, and even ritual purification pools in one of the driest climates on Earth. Al-Khazneh, commonly known as the Treasury, is Petra's most famous facade, but it is only one of over 800 registered monuments carved into the pink sandstone cliffs. Most of Petra's architecture served funerary or ceremonial purposes, including hundreds of tombs ranging from simple shaft graves to monumental mausoleums. In addition to these, Petra also featured a Roman-style theatre that could hold 3,000 spectators. As well as public buildings, markets, colonnaded streets, and a sophisticated temple complex. The Nabateans' religion was deeply rooted in nature. Deities such as Dishara and Uluza were worshipped in open-air sanctuaries and on mountaintops. And sacred stones known as betels, often uncarved and abstract, served as physical manifestations of divine presence. Petra's high place of sacrifice and numerous altars cut into mountaintops reflect these beliefs. These practices marked a departure from Hellenistic or Roman traditions and expressed an austere but spiritual worldview. One fascinating but underappreciated aspect of Petra is the evidence of cultural hybridity. Though fundamentally Arabian, the Nabateans borrowed extensively from their neighbors. Their art and architecture show Greek, Roman, Egyptian, and Mesopotamian influences, but reinterpreted through a uniquely Nabatean lens. The treasury's Corinthian columns, for example, are purely decorative. They do not serve a structural purpose but imitate Roman grandeur. The decline of Petra is often linked to the devastating earthquake of 363 CE, which destroyed large portions of the city's infrastructure. However, this explanation oversimplifies a longer trajectory of economic and political erosion. The Roman annexation of Nabatea in 106 CE gradually redirected trade routes away from Petra in favor of coastal ports like Berenice and Alexandria. The Pax Romana ensured safer sea trade, rendering Petra's overland routes less crucial. Under Roman rule, Petra retained some administrative function, and its population continued for centuries. Yet the Nabateans' unique identity began to dissolve. By the Byzantine period, Christianity had taken root. Excavations have revealed a major Byzantine church containing well-preserved mosaics, depicting not only Christian imagery but also local flora and fauna, such as parrots and lotus flowers. One mosaic even includes a giraffe, suggesting enduring trade links deep into Africa. Despite its cultural richness, Petra eventually faded into obscurity. By the early Islamic period, it was little more than a memory, mentioned occasionally in travelers' accounts but unknown to the wider world. When Johann Ludwig Burckhardt reintroduced Petra to Europe in 1812, he had to disguise himself as a Muslim pilgrim to gain access, guided by Bedouins who feared looting of their sacred landscape. Modern archaeology has only scratched the surface. Less than 20% of Petra has been excavated. Recent drone surveys and ground-penetrating radar have revealed a previously unknown monumental structure, over 50 meters long, lying just beneath the surface. It likely served a ceremonial or administrative function and proves that much of Petra's civic infrastructure still lies undiscovered. One often overlooked quirk, the Nabateans deliberately engineered echoes into the city's architecture. Certain chambers and facades, such as those near the Sikh, the narrow gorge leading into the city, were carved with acoustics in mind, amplifying voices or musical instruments during ritual ceremonies. This suggests an experimental element to Petra's design that transcended the visual, creating a multisensory sacred space. Petra is frequently marketed as a mysterious ruin, a stone city lost to the desert. But that narrative obscures the complexity of the Nabatean world. This was not a forgotten outpost but a cosmopolitan hub at the crossroads of empires, where religion, trade, art, and engineering met in a spectacular synthesis. It's a reminder that desert cultures were not peripheral but central to the story of ancient globalization. And its decline? A potent example of how geopolitical shifts and environmental pressures, when combined with over-reliance on a single economic system, can dismantle even the most resilient societies. Number 3. Babylon in modern Iraq, the myth and the reality. Few cities are as heavily mythologized as Babylon. It has come to symbolize decadence, arrogance, and divine punishment, thanks largely to its depiction in the Bible as the city of sin and the supposed location of the Tower of Babel. Popular imagination conjures images of impossible ziggurats reaching the heavens and lush hanging gardens suspended in mid-air. But behind these half-myths is a real city, one of the most sophisticated urban centers of the ancient world. Babylon's origins can be traced to the early 2nd millennium BCE, but it was under Hammurabi, 1792 to 1750 BCE, that it first emerged as a major imperial power. Hammurabi unified much of Mesopotamia under Babylonian rule and codified one of the earliest and most influential legal systems in human history, the Code of Hammurabi. This set of 282 laws, inscribed on a diorite stele, laid out rules for everything from trade to family relations and civil justice. Its famous maxim, an eye for an eye, has echoed through millennia, though its actual applications were far more nuanced and class-based. The city reached its zenith in the 6th century BCE under Nebuchadnezzar II, 605 to 562 BCE, who undertook a massive building campaign to make Babylon the wonder of the ancient world. The city sprawled across the plains of the Euphrates, protected by double walls and monumental gates. The most famous of these was the Ishtar Gate, adorned with glazed blue bricks and reliefs of lions, dragons, and bulls, symbols of divine protection and royal power. The processional way that led through the gate was paved with slabs of limestone and decorated with inscriptions extolling the king's achievements. Babylon's religious heart was the Asagila temple complex, dedicated to the god Marduk. At its center stood Etemenanki, a massive ziggurat that many scholars believe inspired later tales of the Tower of Babel. It is thought to have stood around 90 meters tall and would have dominated the city skyline. Unlike later pyramids, ziggurats were not hollow structures or tombs but symbolic stairways between heaven and earth. One of the most enduring mysteries of Babylon is the Hanging Gardens. Ancient sources describe a terraced botanical wonder filled with exotic plants, watered by hidden irrigation systems. Yet no definitive archaeological evidence has been found in Babylon itself. Some scholars now believe the gardens may have been located in Nineveh, the Assyrian capital, or that they existed but were destroyed in antiquity. Others suggest the gardens were real but built atop vaulted terraces that collapsed or were dismantled in later periods. What is less well known is that Babylon was also a center of science, literature, and mathematics. Babylonian astronomers tracked celestial bodies with astonishing accuracy and developed arithmetic methods that influenced Greek and Islamic astronomy. Clay tablets recovered from the site reveal knowledge of square roots, quadratic equations, and even rudimentary integration, centuries before calculus was formalized in Europe. Some tablets charted the movements of Jupiter using trapezoidal calculations, a method unmatched in contemporary cultures. By the time Alexander the Great arrived in 331 BCE, Babylon was still grand, though already past its prime. He planned to make it the capital of his empire and even began renovations, but died there in 323 BCE before his vision could be realized. In subsequent centuries, Babylon declined under the rule of the Seleucids, Parthians, and Sasanians. The Euphrates River gradually shifted course, disrupting the city's water supply and rendering its complex canal system obsolete. Invasions, neglect, and environmental degradation took their toll. By the 1st century CE, Babylon had become a shadow of its former self. Yet it lingered as a settlement and cultural memory for centuries. Even during its decline, Babylon maintained temples and shrines, with priests still reciting hymns in the ancient Akkadian language. Modern excavations at Babylon began in earnest under German archaeologist Robert Coldway in the early 20th century. Coldway spent nearly 2 decades uncovering the city's ruins, including the foundations of the Ishtar Gate, parts of which were transported to Berlin, where they now form a centerpiece of the Pergamon Museum. Coldway's methods, while pioneering, were often destructive by today's standards, and his interpretations have since been revised. Nevertheless, his work brought Babylon back into scholarly consciousness. In more recent times, Babylon has been caught up in modern political narratives. Saddam Hussein launched a controversial reconstruction of Babylon in the 1980s, commissioning the rebuilding of walls and palaces on top of original ruins and inscribing his own name alongside Nebuchadnezzar's on bricks. While intended to glorify Iraq's ancient heritage, the effort was widely criticized by archaeologists for causing irreparable damage to the original site. In the early 2000s, the site suffered further harm when it was used as a base by coalition forces during the Iraq War. Military vehicles and fortifications damaged archaeological features, sparking international outcry. UNESCO eventually designated Babylon a World Heritage Site in 2019, though efforts to conserve and study the ruins continue to face challenges due to regional instability. Babylon is often framed as a cautionary tale of pride before a fall. But the true story is far more complex. It was a city of extraordinary resilience, innovation, and cultural fusion. It flourished for over a millennium, produced some of the earliest scientific texts, and left a legacy that shaped the ancient and modern worlds alike. Its decline was not inevitable, nor sudden. Rather, it was the result of long-term environmental shifts, repeated conquests, and changing political landscapes. Babylon stands not just as a ruin, but as a mirror, reflecting both the heights of human ambition and the vulnerabilities that can undo even the most powerful civilizations. Number 4. Tikal. In modern Guatemala, the Maya superpower lost in the forest. Tikal, one of the largest and most influential cities of the ancient Maya civilization, lies deep within the rainforest of northern Guatemala. At its peak between 200 and 900 CE, Tikal was home to tens of thousands of people and stood as a dominant force in Mesoamerican politics, warfare, culture, and astronomy. Towering limestone temples, some over 70 meters tall, still rise above the forest canopy, offering a ghostly reminder of the city's lost grandeur. Unlike empires such as Rome or Babylon, the Maya world was never unified under a single ruler. Instead, it was composed of dozens of independent city-states, each ruled by its own king. Tikal was one of the most powerful among them and engaged in a centuries-long rivalry with another superpower, Calakmul. These two cities fought not only with armies but through alliances, trade disputes, dynastic marriages, and espionage, forming what some scholars refer to as the Maya Cold War. Tikal's kings carried the divine title Kahul-Ajor, Holy Lord, and their rule was legitimized by elaborate rituals, bloodletting ceremonies, and monumental architecture. The city's temples were not just tombs or places of worship but instruments of political propaganda. Temple I, also known as the Temple of the Great Jaguar, was built as a funerary monument for Jasor Chan Kaewil I, who revived Tikal's fortunes in the 7th century after decades of military defeats and political obscurity. At its height, Tikal controlled a vast hinterland and maintained diplomatic links with distant cities such as Teotihuacan in central Mexico. In fact, there is evidence that foreign influence, possibly military or mercantile, played a role in Tikal's early dynastic history. One stela depicts a ruler in Teotihuacan-style garb, and exotic goods such as obsidian from central Mexico have been found in the city's archaeological record. But what made Tikal so remarkable wasn't just its pyramids or politics. It was also a center of scientific and cosmological knowledge. Maya scribes developed one of the most advanced writing systems in the ancient world, using over 800 glyphs to record dynastic history, astronomical calculations, and sacred myths. Many of these glyphs were carved into stelae, staircases, and altars across the site, forming a complex narrative that archaeologists are still deciphering. Tikal's calendar system was similarly advanced. The Maya could predict eclipses and calculated the solar year with an error of just 17 seconds. Their long count calendar, infamously misrepresented during the 2012 doomsday hysteria, was a sophisticated means of tracking vast epochs of time. Temples at Tikal were often aligned to celestial events. For example, certain doorways framed the sunrise on the solstices or equinoxes, turning the city into a sacred observatory. Despite these achievements, Tikal did not survive the pressures of the classic Maya collapse, a complex, centuries-long process that saw the abandonment of most major lowland cities between the 8th and 10th century CE. The causes remain debated, but current evidence points to a combination of factors: prolonged droughts, likely linked to climate change, overpopulation and deforestation that led to soil exhaustion, and endemic warfare that destabilized the entire region. Paleoecological studies show that deforestation around Tikal was severe. The city's inhabitants cleared large swathes of forest for maize farming, construction, and fuel. This not only reduced biodiversity but also disrupted rainfall patterns and increased erosion. Soil analyses from nearby reservoirs show elevated levels of mercury, likely from cinnabar used in ritual pigments, suggesting contamination and declining water quality. In effect, the city's own grandeur may have contributed to its downfall. By the late 9th century, inscriptions at Tikal begin to fall silent. The last dated monument is from 869 CE. Soon after, the city was abandoned. Yet the abandonment was likely gradual, not cataclysmic. people may have remained in outlying areas for generations, continuing subsistence farming and ritual visits even as the ceremonial core fell into disuse. Modern archaeology has dramatically expanded our understanding of Tikal's scale. Beneath the jungle canopy lies a vast web of roads, terraces, reservoirs, and residential zones. These discoveries challenge the stereotype of Maya cities as small ceremonial centers and reveal instead a sprawling urban landscape interconnected by causeways and defensive ramparts. Tikal also had an intricate water management system, including large reservoirs lined with plaster and complex filtration features. Some reservoirs even show evidence of engineered sedimentation basins, possibly to separate silt or maintain potable water. Such innovations reflect a high level of civic planning and environmental awareness, qualities often overlooked in popular portrayals of the Maya. Perhaps most surprising is the degree to which Tikal and its contemporaries were part of a wider network. Recent finds include cacao residues in vessels, jade from hundreds of kilometers away, and seashells from the Caribbean, indicating active long-distance trade. The Maya may not have used the wheel for transport, but their rivers and forest paths formed arteries of cultural exchange. Today, Tikal's temples rise like islands above a sea of green. Their silent grandeur speaks to a civilization that valued time, astronomy, and continuity, but which ultimately succumbed to pressures that feel eerily modern: ecological stress, political division, and overreach. The story of Tikal is not just one of collapse, but of complexity, adaptation, and legacy. The Maya didn't vanish, their descendants still live across Central America, preserving language, traditions, and a deep spiritual connection to the land. Tikal's fall reminds us that civilizations are not immortal, but their stories endure, carved in stone, waiting to be read anew. Number 5. Nan Madol in Micronesia, the Venice of the Pacific. Nan Madol is perhaps the most astonishing, and least understood, city on this list. Situated off the southeast coast of Pohnpei in the Federated States of Micronesia, Nan Madol consists of nearly 100 artificial islets constructed atop a shallow coral reef. These small islets are separated by narrow canals, giving the city its nickname, the Venice of the Pacific. Built primarily from massive basalt columns stacked horizontally like logs, Nan Madol is a rare example of megalithic architecture in the Pacific Islands. The construction of Nan Madol began around the 8th or 9th century CE, but it flourished under the Sordala dynasty from the 12th to 16th centuries. This dynasty imposed a highly centralized form of rule over Pohnpei, uniting the island's formerly autonomous clans through a system of tribute, ritual hierarchy, and coercion. The city of Nan Madol functioned as both ceremonial center and seat of government, a space separated from the general population both geographically and symbolically. Each islet had a specific function. Some were residential, others held temples or burial platforms, and several were reserved for ritual preparation. The most sacred among them, Nan Dorwas, was built with walls up to 7.5 meters high and served as the tomb complex for the Sordala rulers. Archaeological surveys have revealed coral fill beneath the basalt foundations, suggesting a deliberate effort to stabilize the islets against the shifting reef and tides. Building these platforms would have required thousands of laborers and precise engineering. One of the enduring mysteries of Nan Madol is how its builders transported the immense basalt columns, many of which weigh between 5 and 20 tons. There are no known basalt quarries on the islets themselves. The nearest sources are located on the opposite side of Pohnpei. While some researchers propose the use of bamboo rollers, log sleds, and large rafts, local oral traditions speak of levitation, magic, and divine assistance. In particular, the legends of twin sorcerer builders, Olasipa and Olasopa, tell of mystical powers used to command the stones, narratives which have long inspired pseudoscientific theories, including alien intervention. One persistent legend claims the stones were made to float across the sea, as if guided by supernatural force. While clearly mythical, some scholars speculate that builders may have lashed logs into buoyant rafts that could transport basalt columns across water, a feat of engineering that, if confirmed, would rival many ancient logistical achievements. Nan Madol's architecture also carried ritual significance beyond its scale. On certain islets, archaeologists have identified stone enclosures believed to have housed sacred eels, creatures associated with spirits and ancestral powers in local belief. These eels were ritually fed with coconut and fish, forming part of regular ceremonies and spiritual observances. Trade and economy at Nan Madol were similarly regulated through ritual and tribute. Excavations have uncovered shell-based currency such as cowries and even stone discs akin to rye stones, suggesting an elite-controlled economy. These materials came from other Pacific islands, reinforcing the notion that Nan Madol was part of a broader maritime network. Another curious feature of the city is its relationship to water. Nan Madol had no natural freshwater sources, yet several shallow wells on the islets produced brackish but usable water. It is believed that coral and basalt filtration allowed some level of water purification, a rare adaptation in an environment so removed from rivers or springs. This may have supported basic hygiene or ritual purification, even if drinking water had to be imported. Adding to the site's mysterious reputation are repeated reports of glowing lights or flickering orbs seen around the ruins at night. These bioluminescent legends, described in both oral traditions and modern anecdote, have been interpreted as spiritual manifestations, though no scientific explanation has been confirmed. More plausibly, the feat reflects the ingenuity of a maritime society adept at coordinating large-scale labor projects with limited tools. The logistics of feeding, housing, and managing a workforce in such an isolated setting suggest a high degree of social organization. The absence of wheeled transport or draft animals did not prevent the construction of one of the most ambitious urban experiments in Oceania. Nan Madol is also remarkable for its absence of arable land. The city had no agricultural hinterland and depended entirely on supply lines from inland Pohnpei. Food, firewood, and fresh water had to be ferried in by canoe. This logistical vulnerability likely contributed to its eventual decline. When the centralized system faltered, the flow of resources ceased, and the city could not sustain itself. Historical accounts and oral histories portray the Sordler as increasingly tyrannical and arbitrary in their rule. Ritual obligations became excessive, and nobles were required to abandon their homes and serve full-time at Nan Madol. This centralization of authority, combined with resentment and religious discontent, led to revolt. According to tradition, the Sordler were overthrown by a warrior named ecological, who is still venerated today as a cultural hero. After their defeat, Nan Madol was gradually abandoned and became a place of fear and taboo. Archaeological evidence supports a relatively rapid decline. Excavations suggest that many of the islets were unoccupied by the 17th century. Structures were left to collapse, and vegetation slowly reclaimed the coral platforms. The sacred character of the site persisted, however, and many local Pohnpeians still consider Nan Madol a place to be approached with caution. In recent decades, modern researchers have begun to appreciate Nan Madol not merely as a curiosity but as a sophisticated expression of political theology. Its physical separation from the mainland may have mirrored a cosmological separation, positioning the rulers closer to the divine, and reinforcing their authority through spatial and symbolic distance. Some scholars interpret the city's grid-like layout and ritual zoning as a deliberate attempt to impose order on both nature and society, akin to temple cities found in Southeast Asia and Polynesia. Advanced technologies such as ground-penetrating radar and satellite imaging have revealed previously undocumented structures, suggesting that Nan Madol may be larger and more complex than previously thought. Underwater surveys have also identified submerged features that could be harbors or defensive outworks, hinting at a maritime function beyond ceremony and governance. Yet Nan Madol remains little known outside of Micronesia. Often sensationalized in documentaries and fringe theories, it is rarely presented within the broader narrative of global urbanism. Its fall, unlike that of Angkor or Babylon, came not from conquest or drought, but from the breakdown of an unsustainable centralized system that could not survive without constant external support. In that sense, Nan Madol is a cautionary tale of infrastructure without resilience. It demonstrates how political authority can build a monumental city, but if the underlying social and logistical systems falter, even the most impressive feats of engineering can become ruins. And like the basalt columns scattered across the reef, its story remains partly submerged, waiting to be assembled into a fuller picture of the human past. So what's the takeaway from these 5 forgotten cities? It's not that great civilizations are doomed to fail, it's that even the most advanced societies can unravel when they ignore their own vulnerabilities. Whether it's over-reliance on one resource, political arrogance, or pushing the environment too far, history has a way of repeating itself. Maybe that's why these ruins still fascinate us. They're not just relics of the past, they're mirrors. And if we pay attention, they might just help us avoid the same fate. If you enjoyed this deep dive into lost cities, don't forget to like the video, it really helps. And subscribe if you want more stories from the shadows of history. Let us know in the comments, which of these cities do you think holds the biggest warning for us today? Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.